Welcome back to the channel. Today's story is about a woman who thought her marriage was solid until she found out her own husband was quietly trying to sell the house she owned, using forged paperwork, while she was none the wiser. This one has a fake power of attorney, a missed call from a stranger, and a confrontation that ends a 6-year marriage in about 90 seconds. If you like stories about betrayal, quiet detective work, and someone finally standing up for herself, stay until the end, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's get into it. At 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a missed call from a number I didn't recognize, followed by a voicemail that began, "Hi, this is Denise from Lakeside Realty, just following up on the listing paperwork for your property on Birchwood Lane." I didn't have a listing. I hadn't spoken to any realtor. And the house on Birchwood Lane was mine, bought with my inheritance, in my name alone, 6 years before my husband and I even met. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and I'm 34 years old. I work as an interior designer in Houston, Texas, and for the last 6 years I've been married to a man named Mark, a commercial contractor I met at a mutual friend's wedding. We fell into a relationship the way people do when everything seems to click, same sense of humor, same taste in restaurants, same plans for the future. We got married 2 years after we met, and we moved into the house on Birchwood Lane, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a wraparound porch that I had bought outright, in cash, for years before I even knew Mark existed. The house wasn't just property to me. It was the last thing my grandmother left me before she passed. She'd worked as a school cafeteria manager for 31 years, saved every spare dollar, and left me enough to buy a home free and clear at 28 years old. I remembered standing in the empty living room the day I got the keys, thinking about how proud she would have been. When Mark and I got married, he moved in, and we built a life there together. But the deed never changed. It stayed in my name, because that's how it had always been, and because, frankly, neither of us ever thought to question it. For the first 4 years of our marriage, things were good. Not perfect, but good. Mark ran his own contracting business, doing kitchen remodels and small additions around the Houston suburbs. I built my design practice slowly, one referral at a time. We split expenses, we argued about normal things, whose turn it was to load the dishwasher, whether to visit his parents or mine for Christmas, and I genuinely believed we were building something solid. The cracks started showing about a year and a half ago, though I didn't recognize them as cracks at the time. Mark's business had taken on a large commercial job that went badly. A client disputed the final invoice, a subcontractor walked off mid-project, and Mark ended up eating nearly $60,000 in costs he couldn't recover. He didn't tell me the full extent of it. I only pieced it together later, the way you piece together a puzzle after you already know what the picture is supposed to be. What I noticed, in real time, were smaller things. Mark started asking questions about the house that he'd never asked before. How much did I think it was worth now, with the market the way it was? Had I ever thought about refinancing? Did I know where the original deed paperwork was kept? I answered honestly, because I had no reason not to. I told him the house was probably worth close to twice what I'd paid for it. I told him the paperwork was in a fireproof lockbox in the hall closet, alongside my grandmother's will and my old passport. A few weeks later, I noticed the lockbox wasn't quite where I'd left it. It wasn't dramatic, nothing was missing, nothing was broken, but the box had clearly been moved from the back of the shelf to the front, and the little combination dial wasn't sitting at the number I always left it on out of habit. I asked Mark about it. He said he'd been looking for our marriage certificate for something with his business insurance. It was a reasonable enough answer, and I let it go. I shouldn't have. Then, about 2 months ago, Mark started talking about a friend in real estate who could get us a great red on the market if we ever wanted to sell and upgrade to something bigger, maybe closer to his job sites. I told him, clearly, that I had no interest in selling. The house meant too much to me, and besides, it was fully paid off. Selling it would mean giving up the one asset in our marriage that had zero debt attached to it. Mark nodded and dropped it. Or so I thought. Around that same time, I started noticing small discrepancies in our shared email account, the one we used for household bills. An email from a title company I didn't recognize, opened and then deleted from the inbox, still sitting in the trash folder because Mark hadn't thought to empty it. I opened it out of curiosity more than suspicion. It was a general inquiry about next steps for a property transfer, addressed to Mark, referencing an address that was ours. That was the moment the vague unease I'd been carrying turned into something concrete. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I called my friend Angela, a family law attorney I'd known since college, and asked her, hypothetically, what it would take for someone to sell a house that wasn't in their name. Angela didn't sugarcoat it. She told me that under normal circumstances, it wasn't possible, but that fraud happens more often than people think, usually through forged powers of attorney or forged signatures on transfer documents, especially when one spouse assumes the other will never check. She told me to protect the property first and ask questions second. The next morning, I drove to the Harris County Clerk's office and pulled the current records on my own house, something I'd never had a reason to do before. What I found made my stomach drop. A power of attorney document had been filed 3 weeks earlier, granting Mark the authority to act on my behalf in matters relating to real property, supposedly signed by me. I had never signed anything of the kind. The signature on the document was close to mine, close enough that a notary who didn't know me well might not have questioned it, but it wasn't mine. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the clerk's office for a long time before I could make myself drive home. Angela helped me file an emergency notice with the county clerk contesting the power of attorney as fraudulent, which put a hold on any further filings connected to the property. I also called Denise from Lakeside Realty back, the same realtor whose voicemail had started this whole thing, and asked her directly what listing paperwork she was referring to. She told me, somewhat confused, that a man identifying himself as my husband had come in with a signed power of attorney and asked her to begin preparing the house for a quiet, off-market sale, explaining that his wife traveled frequently for work and preferred he handle it. She said they were planning to move forward with a formal listing within the week. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Mark and I had eaten dinner together for 6 years, and read through the fraudulent power of attorney document line by line, trying to understand how someone I'd built a life with could do this without ever once mentioning it to my face. The next evening, Mark came home from a job site, tired, in his work boots, complaining about a supplier who hadn't delivered materials on time. I let him get through his usual routine, shower, change, sit down on the couch, before I set the folder Angela had helped me put together on the coffee table in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, though something in his voice told me he already knew. "You tell me," I said. He didn't deny it right away. He tried, at first, to frame it as something reasonable, something he'd been planning to bring up eventually. He said his business debt had gotten worse than I knew, that a supplier was threatening to sue him personally, that he'd panicked, that he figured if he could get the sale moving quietly and pay off what he owed, he could tell me afterward and everything would work out fine, because the house would still technically be ours once the debt was cleared. "It was never ours on paper," I said. "You knew that. That's exactly why you forged a signature instead of asking me." He didn't have a good answer for that. He tried anyway, something about how marriage means sharing everything, how I was being technical about ownership when we'd built a life together in that house. I let him finish. Then I told him the truth as plainly as I could. "If you'd come to me and told me you were in trouble, I would have helped you figure it out. What you did instead was forge my name on a legal document so you could sell my grandmother's house without asking me. That's not a marriage problem. That's fraud." The following weeks were some of the hardest of my life, not because I doubted my decision, but because ending a 6-year marriage is never simple, even when the reason is this clear. Angela guided me through filing for divorce, and separately, through reporting the forged power of attorney to the district attorney's office, since notarized document fraud is a criminal matter in Texas regardless of the relationship between the parties involved. Mark's attorney negotiated a deal where he avoided formal prosecution in exchange for a full, notarized withdrawal of the fraudulent document, a signed statement acknowledging what he'd done, and an agreement that any debts from his business would remain solely his responsibility in the divorce settlement, with no claim whatsoever against the house or my personal assets. The divorce was finalized about 8 months after that night in the living room. Mark moved out within 2 weeks of our conversation and into an apartment closer to his job sites. We haven't spoken much since, beyond what was necessary to close things out cleanly. I heard through a mutual friend that his business eventually recovered, slowly, after he brought on a business partner with better financial discipline than he had. I hope that's true. I don't wish him harm. I just don't trust him anymore, and those are two very different things. I still live in the house on Birchwood Lane. I repainted the bedroom that used to be ours a soft sage green, a color Mark always said he didn't like, which is exactly why I chose it. I had the locks changed the week he moved out, not out of anger, but because it felt like the first real step toward the house being entirely, unmistakably mine again, in every sense of the word, not just on paper. Some nights, I sit on the wraparound porch my grandmother never got to see finished, with a cup of tea, and I think about how close I came to losing the one thing she left me because I trusted someone not to touch what wasn't his. I don't regret trusting him back when there was reason to. I only regret how long it took me to notice when that trust stopped being deserved. What I learned, more than anything, is that love and ownership are not the same thing, and a marriage built on honesty doesn't need forged paperwork to hold it together. If someone truly respects you, they ask. They don't forge your name and hope you never check the county records. If you've ever discovered someone you trusted was quietly working against you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this one hit home, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.